Veterans in Transition is sponsored by HireVeteransFirst.com, Jelani Consulting, and Village Connector Community.
Welcome to Veterans in Transition, where we promote the veteran community. Each week we travel around the region highlighting veteran-related news, issues, and events. Can good come out of Southeast DC? That's the question we'll answer in this episode of Veterans in Transition, as correspondent Dr. Eve Taylor sat down with retired Air Force 4-star General Larry Spencer, a DC native who went from Southeast to the Pentagon.
Tell us about your background and where did you grow up?
Well, I actually grew up in Southeast DC, born and raised. My father was career Army, so I was actually born in Walter Reed Army Hospital. Interestingly, my father was in the Korean War and he lost his left hand. And so when he came back and he recovered in Walter Reed, I'm not the typical Army brat because he never moved. So we lived in Southeast DC. He put a uniform on and went back and forth to work. But otherwise, even though he was in the Army, we never moved. We stayed here, stayed put. So I'm a born and bred DC native.
When you went into the military, what were some of the locations that you went into, being born in Washington, D.C., and now exploring other areas that you had never experienced?
First of all, I spent just about 44 years in the Air Force, and I had 22 moves. So I've been to a lot of places. I was initially stationed in North Carolina, which is where I met my wife, and then I went from there to Taiwan. I spent a year there, and so I've been all over. I've visited just about every place, overseas and in the state and stateside.
Are there any stories you would like to share with us that has really been an impactful story about your life, your wife, your children, your father, your grandfather?
One of the things that really impacted me personally was growing up in D.C. Was interesting, but one of the things I got to do that my friends didn't was my grandfather had a farm down in, it was southwest of Richmond, a little south of Appomattox, small town called Red House, Virginia. And I mean, there's nothing there. I mean, in fact, there's a stop sign there and you would actually miss it if somebody didn't tell you were actually in a town. He had about 60 acres or so, and they grew tobacco. And so I would go down every year and spend the summers with I had a cousin that lived with my grandfather, and we were about the same age, so I would go down every summer. And did I enjoy going out and working tobacco? No, but in hindsight, it was one of the best things that could have happened to me because it got me out of the city. It was such a peaceful, serene, calm place where work ethic was really on display. Again, I wasn't used to that growing up in D.C. Both my grandfather and I were sort of introverted, so we didn't talk a lot. We got along okay, but we didn't have a lot of conversation. But this summer in particular, because we were just the two of us, he started talking to me and we started to dialogue a little, and he was trying to teach me things I could tell. Our normal routine was to get on the tractor, and it was a little platform on the back, and I'd jump on the back of the tractor and we'd go out to a tobacco field and we'd work tobacco. This particular morning he said, "We're not going on a tractor, I'm going to hitch up the horse." Okay, that was unusual, but so he hitched up the horse, and he actually, the horse was pulling a platform that had a plow sitting on it. So we went out to one of the fields, and so I sit down playing in the dirt, and he got up behind the horse and I'd never seen that before, started plowing a field. Perfect rows, up and down. And so he then decided that he needed to go in the woods to relieve himself, so he unhooked himself, he went off in the woods. And so I'm sitting there on the ground thinking, okay, I'm going to impress my grandfather. And so I'm going to get up behind this horse and I'm going to start plowing the rows so he can see that I'm not just some city kid, I can work too. So I get up behind this horse and I could barely get this plow up, and so I got the plow up and I knew how to make the horse go forward, so the horse starts walking. Unfortunately, I don't know how to keep the plow straight, so now I'm plowing diagonally across his rows. And the problem is I remembered how to make the horse go forward, but I had no idea how to make the horse stop. I just did not know. And so I'm falling, stumbling, going across his rows. He comes out of the woods and he's livid and he yells out, "Larry, what are you doing?" And then instinctively, I turned to try to see him. I started to stumble because the horse was moving. And as I stumbled to fall, I said, "Whoa," try to catch my balance. Of course, then the horse stopped when I said, "Whoa." I didn't know that. And I'm thinking, oh my God, he's never whipped me before, but this is it. So as he approached me, the first thing he said was, "Are you okay?" And so that gave me a little bit of relief. I wasn't expecting him to care if I was okay or not. And then I said, "Yeah, I'm okay." I said, "I'm sorry, I was just trying." And so he said, stop a minute. He said, "Look, it's okay to try and fail, but it's not okay not to try." Now that was very simple, probably could have been said more eloquently, but I thought about that. And I said, he was teaching me something there that, you're going to fall down. You can't be afraid to step out. And that guides me to today.
So was that a value system that you took with you throughout military and, as you said, through your entire life, that one incident of looking at it as perhaps in your eyes as I have failed trying to impress my grandfather, but he gives me a credo, a motto to live by?
That is absolutely true. I mean, I had people tell me that, "Hey, you're enlisted, you can't be an officer." When I was an officer, I had people say, "Hey, you can't be a general, you're not a pilot, you can't be a general in the Air Force." I heard that sort of negativity my entire career, and that voice of his in the back of my mind always fueled me through those times.
So tell me about your faith then.
I've been born and raised a Christian. My grandfather was a prominent deacon in the church. My father was also trustee, so I grew up in the church. And so that's very important to me. I pray every day, and it is clearly my foundation. If anyone asks me ever, what do I attribute anything to, it's certainly not anything I have done. Faith is clearly my rock.
So are there any Afro-American ancestors, I would say, that you will look on today that you could pull out now and say, this one or this one was also impactful in my life?
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, obviously, I remember growing up at home and I would see my parents had Martin Luther King Jr.'s picture up. Still today, when I hear him speak, his speeches, they send chills, down my spine. I mean, the guy was incredible. Whether it's Henry O. Flipper, who was first African-American to attend the military academy, Benjamin O. Davis Jr., who was first African-American to attend the Air Force Academy. By the way, I don't know if you know much about him. He went through the entire academy and nobody ever talked to him. They silenced him the whole time. Ended up retiring as a 3-star, then later was promoted after he retired to a 4-star. More recently, General Colin Powell, Secretary of State General Colin Powell, was a person that I've met him since, but long before I ever met him, he was a role model for me. I got to go spend some time with Congressman John Lewis, and it was a meeting I'll never forget as long as I live. Here's a young guy that came up as a youngster, that took on the cause of civil rights, obviously followed the teaching of nonviolence with Dr. Martin Luther King, but has devoted his entire life to a cause for equal opportunity and treatment for everyone. And sitting in his office was like sitting in a museum. He's got pictures of his life around his office. And I could barely speak sitting there talking to him about his experiences. He is one that stands out in my mind as someone that provides inspiration for me. By the way, the most profound thing he said to me, I asked him, I said, where are the John Lewises of the day? Why aren't there more people out there doing what you have done? And he leaned back in his chair and he said, I'm looking at one right now. And his point was, what are you all waiting for? You're out there. You just need to go out and do it.
When you were transitioning from the military, Was there some challenges that you faced exiting the military, or did you come out with a optimistic attitude? You've served your 44 years. Now it's time for your transition.
Boy, that's a great question, and it's a complicated question because, and I actually heard the president and his wife talk about that, the first lady talk about this. You know, it's amazing how when I was in uniform, you know, all I heard everywhere I went, thank you for your service. There was an immediate respect. I take my uniform off now and I walk into a mall, you know, I'm followed around like, you know, what is this? Because there are stereotypes out there that says, okay, this is not a military member. They don't know who I am, but stereotypes have led them to believe that here's a black man and boy, I better watch him. That's really unfortunate, but it is reality. And I know people don't like to hear that, but it is my experience. You know, I've lived it. When I go into, you know, if I go into a, you know, an elevator, you know, I watch, and a woman sort of clutches a purse and moves to the other side. I mean, that's a reality. Our society has conditioned us through unconscious bias that when we see certain images, we automatically conjure up certain conclusions about them. And that's so wrong. But we all have it. It's not just, it doesn't matter what your color is, we have been conditioned to view certain groups in a certain way, and it's really unfortunate. And when I was in the Air Force, I was stationed in the White House for 2 years. And I won't show you any pictures. But one year, I actually dressed up in the Easter Bunny suit, and I went out on the South Lawn. I was the Easter Bunny. But for the Easter egg roll for the kids on the South Lawn, President Clinton was in office at the time. So I decided to bring my young daughter in. She was about 11 or 12 at the time because I wanted her to get out and to see the White House and get out. So she was with me. We went to, while we were there, the Secret Service and the military have a really close relationship in the White House. And so I asked one of the Secret Service folks, I said, do you mind if I bring my daughter by? Let's just peek in the Oval Office. I'd like for her to see it. He said, sure. So we went by. So we're standing outside now looking inside this historic Oval Office. And I say to my daughter, I said, you know, now, you know, all these things I've been telling you about studying and doing your homework, if you have the potential and you have the drive and you have the energy and you have the desire, you can one day sit at that desk and be the President of the United States. And without batting an eye, she looked at me and said, Dad, come on. I'm a woman and I'm black. I can't be president. And I thought to myself, wow, where did that come from? My wife and I certainly did not teach her that. That's why it's so important, I think, to continually reinforce, you know, this issue of self-worth and self-esteem is very, very delicate.
Let's talk about diversity. What do you, or what would you say to anybody that is listening to us about diversity in the time that we are in today?
Yeah, diversity, I think, unfortunately, is a very emotional topic, and it really shouldn't be, because when you mention the word diversity, it brings up defenses to some people. I've read several books on diversity that say if you happen to be a person of color or a woman and you're in a company, you don't think the company talks about diversity enough. If you happen to be a majority member, you think they talk about it too much. So there's depending on your life lens, you view that even that word is either something to embrace or something that's threatening. But here's the reality of it is, diversity is not about numbers, it's not about we need to build a Noah's Ark. Diversity is about talent, and it's about quality, and it's about production. And every study I have read says that companies that are diverse perform better. It's about performance. I wanted the Air Force, when I was in the Air Force, to be diverse, not for numbers, not for so I can go out and say the Air Force is diverse, but because the Air Force would be stronger. It would be better. The United States of America is strong because of its diversity. Everyone in the United States, every ethnic group, every race, every gender contributed to the greatness of this country. So diversity is about being better. It's making your organization better, stronger. So in my view, we need to not worry so much about this number or that, or this number or that number or that, but I want a diverse organization because we're going to serve a diverse American population. Therefore, I need diverse talent. It's all about talent.
The work that you do in the schools for kids today, what age bracket are these kids?
Yeah, I've talked in elementary schools, junior high schools, and high schools. I've spoken at several colleges as well. So I've sort of run the gamut. What I appreciate more, I think, is the sort of the middle school, high school, because they're at such a critical age. They've got some really important decisions to make. And when I was in high school, nobody ever came and saw me. No role models came into our school. I think that's so important to see people that look like you, that have been successful and that you can look to. And you know, I don't want people to take this the wrong way, because it's not that African Americans have to have African American role models and, you know, women have to have women role models, because you can have role models of any gender, either gender, any ethnic group, and I certainly have. So I want to make that clear. But at the end of the day, I mean, to really make it mean something, you know, you need to, in my opinion, in my experience, it's important to see people like you that had a similar background than you had, that have, because they have gone through what you go through, that have managed to be successful. And so, again, I try to talk to kids about self-esteem, about self-worth, about, you know, it's one thing for their parents to say you can be anything you want to be. It's another for them to physically see, you know, an African-American president, you know, African-American lawyers and doctors and plumbers and carpenters and people that are doing well for themselves. So all I try to do is go in and say, look, you can do whatever you want to do. Don't let anybody tell you any different.
So I want to ask you about the first Afro-American black president.
It was a moment I never thought I would see. By the way, subsequent to that moment, I've met him and talked to him several times, he and the First Lady, so I am so impressed with them both. I actually hope Mrs. Obama runs for president someday. She is so impressive and so capable. But I think I can summarize my thoughts this way. The night because again, even up until it happened, I didn't think it was going to happen. When it was obvious, and when, you know, all the news stations announced that he's our next president, one of my kids called me and said, "Dad, my God, you know, we have the first African American president. You know, this is great." And he made a statement, something to the effect that, man, he can get in office now and he can do a lot for African Americans. And I paused for a second and I said, let me offer you a different way of thinking about that. I said, I wouldn't so much think about what he can do for you, but think about now what you can do. See, I think a lot of people miss this message. Yes. You know, we got a black president in office, so therefore, but he's president of the United States, not president of African Americans. He's president for everyone. So I said, think about what this really means. What this means is you got no excuse. If this man can come up the way he came up, end up in Harvard University, Harvard Law, end up a senator, end up president of the United States, what excuse do you have now to not accomplish whatever your goals are? As I mentioned to you, I think before, I never had any clue that I would be an officer, much less a 4-star. So I never plotted out my career, and if I do this, I'll get this promotion. So all of this was a shock to me, and I still pinch myself, to be honest with you. But when I was in the Pentagon, I went in the Pentagon for the last time as a brand new 1-star, and actually stayed all the way through the 4-star. When I pinned on my 4th star, it was very emotional for me and my family. And in fact, my 2 kids actually pinned it on, my 2 sons rather. And my first day in the work as a 4-star, I drove into the river entrance of the Pentagon, and I got out of the car and I was walking up the steps. And behind me, which I had seen hundreds of times, there was this row of black cars, and these are cars that have drivers in them that drive, you know, DVs around in the Pentagon, take them around town for appointments. And most of those drivers were African American. And as I walked up the steps, it's even hard for me to talk about it now, about 12 of those gentlemen got out of their car and they came up to me. Now I'm standing in front of the Pentagon now. And they said, "You know what, we've been watching you walk in the Pentagon as a 1-star, as a 2-star, and as a 3-star. And they said, you know what? We could no longer contain ourselves that you're walking in the building as a 4-star, because, you know, and they were all in the military years ago, because when we were in the military, you didn't even see an African-American officer, much less a 4-star. And so they said, you know, we just want to tell you how proud we are of you. And it just tore me up. Because the thought, because I'd grown up looking up to other people. The thought that somebody might look up to me was just, it just tore me apart. And again, those moments for me really make all the sacrifice worthwhile. That if there's one person out there, I don't think I'm worthy of that, but if there's one person out there that looks at me and says, well, I'm going to see how he handled himself, and I'm going to maybe try to do some of the things he did, that is just unbelievable to me. It's hard for me to accept, but it is a heavy responsibility. But that, man, I'm telling you, that really keeps me fired up.
So what was your transition from the military, now being a president of the Air Force Association?
Yeah, actually, it was a fairly easy transition. It wasn't what I had in mind, though. And here's what I mean by that. The Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force is a pretty busy job. It's 24/7. I did it for 3 years. I loved it, loved every minute of it. But I was ready for a break. And so my vision when I retired was to, let's take a month or so off, spend some time with my wife, and just think about what do I want to do with the next phase of my life. But about a month or so before I retired, the president's position of the Air Force Association came vacant. They asked me to interview, and I did, and I got selected. So I literally had a retirement ceremony on a Friday, and I came to work on a Monday. So it was almost not like a transition, but and I came to the Air Force Association, which has a mission of promoting a dominant Air Force. And so the transition intellectually has been pretty easy. As a private organization, we have several arms of the organization. We devote a lot of time to youth development and STEM. So we have a program called Cyber Patriot that works with young folks in computers. We have a program called Stellar Explorers that works with young people in space. We have a think tank that does a lot of intellectual aerospace knowledge called the Mitchell Institute. We have 200 chapters throughout the United States. It's about a 95,000 member organization. We have about 200 chapters with chapter presidents who have state presidents and regional presidents. So they're sort of out on the front line at the tip of the spear, if you will, working with young airmen, with civilian communities, educating them, advocating for and supporting the Air Force. So as you know, we have a great magazine, not only award-winning magazine actually, the Air Force magazine, that has won numerous awards. We've got a daily report that we put out every day to our members that tell them about what's going on with the Air Force, what are the hot issues, just sort of keeping them up to date. I would sort of, the way I sort of summarize what we do, at least for airmen, is, I mentioned to you my brother's a doctor, and so for his professional development, he's a member of the American Medical Association. Lawyers are a member of the American Bar Association, ABA. The Air Force Association is the professional development organization for airmen.
What did it take for you to become a 4-star general?
Well, becoming a 4-star general is, I don't think anyone ought to aspire to do, because there is no boilerplate, there is no roadmap. It's so rare, a lot of luck's involved, a lot of, where are you in the right place at the right time. So I don't think there's a roadmap that one can follow that would guarantee anyone to reach that level in the military. However, I think though there are certain basic principles, I think, that will help folks be successful no matter what, whether in the military or in industry or in a nonprofit. I don't think it really matters. But I think those basics, integrity, being a person of honesty, being a person that people can depend on, being a person of your word. Clearly what I learned from my father and grandfather was work ethic. So I always had as a goal that, you know, there's no way of guaranteeing who's the smartest person in the room, but there's a way of pretty much guaranteeing who's going to work the hardest, and that's sort of what I did. I figured out what my boss was worried about, what was on my boss's plate, and I raised my hand and said, I'll do it. And so I think hard work, integrity, and leadership. I mean, you know, at some point, you know, you have to learn how to follow before you can lead. But I think being a leader, being sincere, being open with people, being a good communicator, all those traits that most great leaders have, and I'm not saying I'm a great leader, but that I've studied most great leaders have, I think work well for me.
That's all for this edition of Veterans in Transition. We ask that you like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. If you have a story to tell, reach out to us at vetsintransition.com. And remember, we all have a story to tell. Until next time.